Welcome to Change for the People, episode 4. We are thrilled to be here today. My name is Max Bach. I am the founder of Change for the People, former Kamala staffer. Change for the People is an organization dedicated to changing the way we campaign. We don't want to show up for elections and just ask for votes. We want to listen to the people. We want to hear their stories and amplify their voices. We want to discuss the issues in their communities. We want to figure out the problems so we can come up with the solutions. Our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower everyday people across the country to become a part of the change. Today, we're going to talk about voter education. We will be speaking with the executive director of the Arkansas Civic Action Network. She is a researcher, educator, activist, and civil engagement advocate. We will discuss her work in a red state with some of the lowest civic engagement rates in America. We will break down effective voter engagement strategies, talk about the Democratic Party's problems with voter education, and look at possible solutions. Alrighty, and I am so pleased to introduce one of our board members, my good friend, Dr. Gail Choate. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, that's who I am, right? I'm Dr. Gail Choate. I'm the executive director of Arkansas Civic Action Network. And as of 2 years ago, a proud Arkansan. So, well, thanks for having me on.
Terrific. Yeah, so glad we're here. We've been talking about this for about a year, so it's great to finally have you on and talk about these issues and everything. So could you tell us your story a little bit? Where did you grow up and how did you end up in Arkansas?
So I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Go Pack, go. I always have to say that. But I moved to Florida for a job in the late 1980s and spent 30 years there. That's where I raised my kids. So I started off in the corporate world and over time decided that I wanted to do something different for a whole bunch of reasons. Went back to school, got a master's in political science in the early 2000s and started teaching at the university level. So once I was there and I was teaching everything from American government to international relations to ethnic conflict, civil war, the oil curse, all of those kinds of things, I had the opportunity to continue my education and start working on my PhD. And that's how I got to Arkansas. I was actually here during the 2021-2022 campaign cycle when the governor race was going hot and heavy here in Arkansas, as well as in Georgia and Florida and Virginia, because I wanted to study candidates who didn't look like the historic norm. So that's how I got here, fell in love with the state, fell in love with the people, and really saw some amazing grassroots organizing happening. And so in 2024, I was still teaching, but academic freedom was being outlawed in Florida. We were getting more and more pressure to constrain political theory, quit talking about things that were happening in the real world because of the political situation. And so I had just had it up to here and said, this is not fun anymore. I'm going to go someplace where I can be part of the change. And so I moved to Arkansas.
Yeah, well, that is quite the journey from Wisconsin to Florida to Arkansas. And that's funny because that's actually how we met was you came down here for an event for Chris Jones and our paths happened to cross. And so it's cool that we started there, then we're here and doing the work that matters and fighting for all this change and everything. Okay, so what got you initially interested in social justice activism or politics? Was it something that happened when you were a kid? Like, did you go to a protest with your parents, or was it something that happened to you as a young adult when you were in college? Like, what kind of sparked your interest to become a activist and who you are today?
So I kind of grew up in that post protest era. So I was born too late to really be active in the anti-war protests or that sort of thing. But my exposure really came from, I'm going to say my dad first. My dad was a union organizer. So he worked in the paper mills in Wisconsin. He was a shop steward. He was always an officer of his union. And as a result of that, I really saw collective action in process. I mean, during my lifetime growing up, they went on strike a couple of different times, and I saw the community come together and support them and have them take a stand and get concessions from the company. So I think that union organizing was part of my first entree. My mom was also always really involved politically, a little bit different, but she was always in the PTA and on our church councils and all of that kind of thing. So I think I grew up in a family that had a strong support of being involved in the community. And that's kind of where it all started. Kind of got my teeth wet though on organizing when we decided in my high school that we were sick and tired of the school celebrating St. Patrick's Day, which sounds really weird, right? But in Green Bay at that time, there weren't a whole lot of people who were Irish. Most of the people who lived there were German, Norwegian, Belgian. Yeah. So we decided, why don't we celebrate a holiday that celebrates our heritages? So we made one up. And we presented it. We got a bunch of kids together. We presented it to the administration at the school, and ultimately they let us have this holiday that we created. And so that's what I really began to first personally see, that I could have a voice, but I also amplify my voice with others by coming into the collection. And so I think that was really the thing that got me going.
Yeah, that's such a cool story, and it's so different from a lot of the ones you generally hear. But that's really neat. And so many people have all these different kind of journeys and things that happen in different parts of their life and everything. And so that's really cool that happened. Okay. So can you tell us more about your research project that focused on the Florida, Arkansas, and Georgia gubernatorial races?
Well, so like I said, I was really interested in understanding how candidates who didn't look like the historic norm, and that being, when we're talking about governor races, that's really, white Christian men, right? Middle-aged white Christian men. And I wanted to know how candidates who didn't look like that, like what held voters back from voting for them? What was it about their identity that suddenly made it come forward? I mean, we saw this a lot, like in Kamala Harris's campaign for president, right? Yeah. Suddenly, the fact that she was a woman, she was African-American, she was of Asian descent, all of those things made people feel like they could question her qualifications, right? Yeah. And I was really interested in how that happened, or how that was happening at a governor level. So I chose to go to Georgia, of course, because during that campaign cycle, it was Stacey Abrams running against Brian Kemp, white man, African-American woman. In Florida, during the primary season, it was Charlie Crist, white man, who had been actually a Republican governor, now running for the Democratic nomination against a woman named Nikki Fried, who was a Jewish American woman. So again, that kind of thing. And then here in Arkansas, of course, it was Chris Jones, African-American man, running against Sarah Huckabee Sanders, a white woman. So I was really interested in spending time doing qualitative research, field work, participant observation, interviewing people, that sort of thing, in order to try to see how candidates present their identity, how they align their identity with grassroots groups and with social movement groups as a way to become part of the we.
Interesting. So what do you think? What was your biggest finding out of all that? What was something like you took away from it that you didn't know before, or you thought kind of like all the work that you did, you came to this conclusion?
So I think what I discovered was that successful candidates really were able to reposition themselves into a group, right? So for an example, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. During her campaign, she in essence, I mean, you were here, Max, she didn't even really campaign, right? She just relied on her proximity to Trump, her proximity to her father, and her proximity to the MAGA movement was really her entire campaign strategy. So it wasn't like about, oh, here's my qualifications, or here's my dreams, or my goals for Arkansas. It was basically just, I'm MAGA, you're MAGA, vote for me. Yeah. So, excuse me, I thought that was really interesting. In Georgia, what I thought was really interesting is that it was actually the second time Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams were matching up, that they were running against each other. During the first campaign, Stacey Abrams was really a grassroots kind of a candidate, meaning that people didn't really know her, even though she had been, in the General Assembly. They didn't really know who she was. And so
Yeah.
as a result of that, a grassroots candidate kind of stands back and doesn't declare or oversell their identity. And as a
Yeah.
result of that, people are able to kind of project their own identities onto the candidate. And that's what gets people excited, right? Because they look at a candidate and they say, oh my gosh, they can do this for me. They can do
Yeah.
that for me. They understand me, right? And Chris Jones, it kind of was the same thing here in Arkansas, that similar kind of approach. So was Nikki Fried when she ran for agricultural commissioner in Florida.
Yeah.
What happens is the second time they run, they think they know who they are and they think they know which voters they want. And instead of being expansive, they contract. And so I argue that that's what cost Stacey Abrams the governorship. She tried to limit who she was talking to, who she related to, who could see themselves with her, because she thought she knew better than the general public who she was. And when that happened, it fell apart. Nikki Fried told me the same thing happened to her when she went from state agricultural commissioner, which is a real grassroots campaign, into the run for governor. Same thing happened. She tried to define who she was so tightly that it hurt her. And I worry about that with Chris Jones in this coming election.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so I was on her Stacey Abrams' first gubernatorial race in 2018. And you're right, it was a huge grassroots campaign where we were just trying to get out who she was and just her story, all her accomplishments, her vision for Georgia, what she stands for, her background as the minority leader in the state house. She had done all these incredible things. She had the voter project where they registered, I think, like 500,000 voters. So she was a major force in Georgia. But to me, she's one of the women responsible, or one of the people responsible for us turning Georgia blue in 2020. Because I don't think if all her work, if she didn't do that for years, and if she didn't lay the foundation for everything, I don't think we ever would have done it. But I could see that big difference in her 2022 campaign. To me, it was vastly different, where she was playing a little bit more of a, not so much defense, but more like a safe campaign. And
I was just going to I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the things that you bring up about the safe campaign comes from money, right? So money started pouring in. And when that happened, instead of relying upon grassroots organization, which creates not just action, but identity and emotion, she started to rely on money, right? So they hired paid canvassers, they hired paid staff, they did things very differently, wouldn't you think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think it was probably more, I think there was more probably media, and I think that kind of, I don't know, not so much the corporate angle, but I think it was probably more of a large campaign that took away from some of the organizing aspect and some of the grassroots stuff you're talking about, and just trying to get out there and engage as many voters as you can. So yeah, completely. I thought it was much different just looking at it from the outside in 2022 after being on the inside in 2018. And then Chris Jones' campaign here, to me, one of the similarities you could see between the two of them is both of those governors, or Sarah Sanders, when she was running for governor, they basically just had to play defense because she had a much bigger lead than Brian Kemp did, but Brian Kemp was also the current Secretary of State. So he was already in office, and so he had a lot of power. Right. And they only debated once. So yeah, very interesting races on both of them, but that's a really unique perspective, because I never even thought about that. Like her second time around, how much different it was. So yeah. Okay. Terrific. Okay, so let's talk about your organization. Why did you start it, and what exactly do you guys do?
So it started because during my time here in the state, I began to also see, like I said, the sprouts, the budding of some really interesting grassroots organizing happening. And I think one of the things that happened that kind of demonstrated that was that during the campaign in 2022, we began to see people identify, like I was going around the state with Chris Jones and with Kelly Crowd and with some of the Republican candidates as well. But on the Democratic side, what I kept hearing from people was we'd be in these rooms and they'd look at each other and they'd go, I didn't know you were liberal. right?
Yeah.
There was this like eye-opening thing. And I think you saw it, you and I've talked about that before. And so I think what happened was I began to see this grassroots thing happening, right? So when Sarah Huckabee Sanders pushed through the LEARNS Act, educational reform, her
Yeah.
first thing out, right, January of 2023, there was immediately a referendum group that formed, right, of people who were involved in education. It was
Yeah.
called CAPES. And so I had been, even though I was back in Florida at that time, I kept in contact with them. And so I met a lot of people and started now looking at grassroots organizing in Arkansas, looking at the lack of participation that was
Yeah.
happening in the state, the low voter turnout, the low civic engagement. And I'm an educator. So, of course, my immediate thought was it's because of education. People just, you can't ask people to do something if they don't know what it is that they could be doing, right? So
Right.
when I moved here, I met there was a gentleman who I'd been working with whose name was Davis Hendricks, and he also a longtime educator. So we decided that our contribution, right, to making change in Arkansas was to do civic education, to try to help people understand the system that they live in so that they can figure out how they can find their niche within it and they can facilitate the change that they want to see in their communities.
Interesting. Yeah, and we've talked about that a bunch. I mean, Arkansas, we're dead last in voter registration and voter turnout. And so we've always talked about what is the connection between voter education and voter engagement, voter turnout, and everything. And what does your organization do specifically?
So we provide community-based education programs. So
Okay.
like tonight, I'm going to be going to, after I'm done with this interview with you, I'm going to be
Mhm.
going to West Memphis and doing
Okay.
Get Vote Ready workshops. Workshops that are designed to help people feel confident when they go to the poll. Everything
Gotcha.
from where to go to how to find your sample ballot to how to investigate or research candidates,
Yeah.
how to walk into the poll feeling confident, right? That you
Yeah.
know what to do. So we're doing those workshops around the state. Like I said, there's one tonight in West Memphis, on Saturday in Springdale, on Sunday in Eureka Springs, and then there's one in Zoom on Monday night. So we do that type of thing. In addition to the voting workshops, we have
Yeah.
worked with the Secretary of State's office and the University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension to put together a volunteer canvasser training so that volunteers who want to be part of direct democracy know what the laws are.
Yeah.
And how they can do things safely, correctly, and make everybody's voices count the most they can. So that type of thing. Wherever we see a need for education, or we think that more knowledge will help empower people, that's where we jump in.
That is so cool. And it's something that really nobody else is doing in Arkansas or even in a lot of states, because I haven't seen very much of that in different states across the country. And I know how much that's needed because that's one of the biggest issues when you talk to voters. That's one of the biggest things is like, I have no idea how to do this, or this. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what these candidates stand for. And so I think that's such a really good start to kind of working in Arkansas on all of these things. If we don't start there, we're never really going to get to the next level, in my opinion, because you're going to, like we talked about it before, you're going to do a lot of voter registration, but then is there any engagement with that, right? So they registered to vote, then what? Yeah. So, and y'all do an internship, is that correct? An internship program with college kids or high school students? Okay.
Yes, we have, last summer we worked with college kids. We had 2 college interns who were really taking a look at grassroots organizing around the state. So we had one that took a look at some of those identity issues. He was more of a statistics and data guy. So we had him running a whole bunch of data for us on both the legislature as well as different population centers. So we kind of see where the mismatches were and where things lined up the same.
Yeah.
The other gentleman was more involved in grassroots organizing, and he's really interested in the lithium extraction that was happening in the southwest part of the state. So he spent some time down in that area talking to people about how they saw the lithium changing their communities, how they
Yeah.
felt they were involved or not involved. And that's been really interesting because I mentioned earlier, my master's degree is in comparative politics on the
Yeah.
dealing with the oil curse or the resource curse. And it's fascinating to me how that same literature applies to lithium extraction and to data centers that are being built all around the state. So we sell those things as being good things, but I would argue they have the potential to cause great harm to our communities and to our democracy. So I think we have to be really, very careful about those.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, they're doing it for a reason, and it's not really for a lot of the goodness of the state and everything. So,
Mhm.
yeah, and that's so interesting doing an internship program. I remember I took a class on Arkansas politics, and it talked about when Bill Clinton was governor, he had a massive internship program
Mhm.
for high school students and college students because he wanted to get the next generation into not so much being Democrats, but also really a head start on politics and getting involved in like the civic part, the civic education part. So it's cool you're doing it. Like
Well,
that's
can I just add
yeah,
on to that, Max? Because one of the things that we're doing is we actually have a high school program that's kicking off right now over in Charleston and in
okay,
Little Rock. And that high school program gives kids some formal civic education, but
okay,
then structures a mechanism for them to create and implement their own community service project. And it's building on that idea that the kids have to have 75 hours of community service hours before they can graduate, but they aren't given a lot of opportunities for that to be meaningful. And just like I mentioned at the very beginning today, that my entry into social justice work was finding out that my voice mattered and I could amplify it. So we're trying to give that same opportunity to high school kids. So that's a program that we're hoping we're going to be able to really roll out in other parts of the state, especially in communities that maybe aren't the urban centers and don't have
yeah,
as many resources available for kids to do things that are meaningful.
yeah. That is really cool. And I think it's like we talked about before, it's so needed, especially in this state and across the country. I think you need that in almost every state
Mhm.
because our side is so bad with a lot of these issues and just a lot of like the basic voting principles,
Mhm.
basic election principles, everything. And that's one of the ways the right beats us because they can just put out disinformation, propaganda, rhetoric, and everything. And if we're not educated, that doesn't really get us excited to vote because we're like, okay, why should we vote, right?
Right.
And then that's one of the reasons I think we lose. So, yeah, okay. So, what are the biggest challenges to working in such a red state like Arkansas? And I know some of them because I've worked in this state before, but in your opinion, what are some of the biggest hurdles?
I think the biggest hurdles have to do with just um, that partisanship that has convinced people to not be in the same room.
Yeah,
Because the kinds of things that we're talking about, civic engagement, voting, building stronger communities, right? All of that is a neighbor to neighbor conversation.
yeah,
And it's really fascinating to me. One of the, one of the, I teach a class at Hendrix College, and we were taking a look at Tocqueville, right? And the things that he wrote back in the 1800s about the beauty of America, and he talks about associations and how valuable they are to individuals, to community, and how vital they are to democracy. And I would argue that today that's really difficult. Like those associations have kind of gone by the wayside for a lot of reasons. But
yeah,
one of them is this political divide that we have that
yeah,
keeps us from talking or approaching things as a community issue and as a community problem. So I think that's probably the biggest thing to me is that this unwillingness, I guess, to communicate with somebody who might have a different political view than you.
yeah. Yeah, because how can you really build community power when the other side is basically anti doing anything with you?
Mhm.
And that's going to put put a huge fracture in a lot of the work you can try to do. And I think that's one of the biggest differences that I've seen in Arkansas versus a state like Wisconsin or Illinois, where it wasn't so divided and it just, you didn't have as much tension. And you probably had a lot of Republican voters in those states a lot of times vote for Democrats because they were more centrist. Whereas here, they're just, a lot of them are just hardcore right. So they're just like, they look at our side like we're the enemy. And it's like, no. And, you know, so interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's also interesting, you know, Arkansas was the last state to turn red, last southern state to turn red, right? And if you think about it, back in 2010, right, we were a blue state. Arkansas was a blue state, and then it flipped, right? And it went from supermajority blue to supermajority red. Well, it couldn't have done that if it wasn't for the middle.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That flip didn't come from the hard edges. It came from the middle, which tells you that there's a lot of people that are centrist. But for some reason, they've now adopted this party identity, this label for themselves. So if we can figure out how to get rid of that or how to minimize it, I think we've got an amazing potential here because we have such a strong middle that actually exists.
Yeah, I never really thought about that either. I mean, but yeah, when you look at it, we used to be a blue state and we had blue everything, blue governor, Democratic governor, congressmen, senators, Mark Pryor, Bumpers, Bill Clinton, Mike Beebe. And it's amazing how we flipped completely red. And I remember here in 2014 when Asa Hutchinson won the governor's seat and everything went red completely. It had gone before, you know, it was kind of after 28, Obama got elected, then it started going, you know, 2 years. Then in 2014, it was a complete wipeout, a realignment. And yeah, so a lot of those people in the middle, like you said, they shifted right and probably quit voting Democrat. And so it's like, okay, how do we reach those voters who used to vote for us, right? I mean, because there had to have been a reason back then, and life isn't really too much different now than it was 25 years ago, if you think about it, in Arkansas. I mean, the economy is about the same. We have a really good economy here. And so, yeah, so there's obviously potential, like you said. Yeah. All right. So there is hope. You're telling us there's hope.
I think so. I think that.
Okay. We're not doomed. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. So the National Democratic Party clearly has a problem messaging our policy accomplishments to voters. I spoke with tons of people in 2024 and they had no idea what the Biden-Harris administration had actually done. That was one of the biggest things I got out there on the campaign trail in 2024. Actually, every campaign that I've worked on, every national campaign, they're like, okay, what has Vice President Harris done? What has Joe Biden done? What has Hillary Clinton done? And a lot of the times people have no idea, which tells me we have a really bad problem with voter education. So let's get more into that. So how important is voter education when it comes to reaching voters and getting people to vote?
Oh my gosh, I think it's the linchpin, you know, to everything else. And I think like we have to start with just the very basics. Like people don't understand what level of government does what. You know, I was at a meeting, a town hall kind of a meeting where it was a congressional race. And people were talking about like what was important and what they wanted the candidate to know and what they wanted the candidate to do if he was elected into office. And, you know, this one woman, you know, she said, I believe in public education and I want him, if he's elected to Congress, to overturn the Learns Act. And I was like, oh, honey, you know, bless your heart. But Congress can't overturn the Learns Act, you know?
No.
I talk to people all the time. Yesterday, the mayor of Conway came to my class at Hendricks, and he said, you know, people don't know who fixes a pothole. You know, they think that somehow the governor, right, is going to fix the pothole on their street when it's not. So I think it's like even starting like that basic. Who does what? You know, what's the difference between your city council and your quorum court and your state government and your federal government, and having an understanding of that. So now, if you think about it, if you don't understand that, Max, and then you start overlaying these very wonky policy prescriptions
Yeah.
People don't understand. So what we do is we make people feel stupid,
Yeah.
right? And it's like Maya Angelou said, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you make them feel.
Oh,
And so
100%.
if your messaging, right, consistently tells people they're too stupid to understand what we're talking
Yeah.
about, why would they jump on that bandwagon? They won't.
Oh, not at all. And especially, I think another thing that we're bad at too is overloading people with too much information, especially when you first meet them. And sometimes less is more, especially with someone who has no idea what a lot of this stuff does. So
Right.
if you're canvassing for somebody like this judicial race I'm working on for circuit judge, so Ashley Buckley, she's worked with alternative courts, and this position has a lot of power. They oversee a lot of felony cases, a lot of civil cases, and a lot of things that are going to directly impact people's lives. But I think if you come in there with just an overload of information and not break down simple points and everything, and like you said, how you make people feel is going to be a big part of it, right? So if you come in and just, yeah,
And it was one of the things I was really excited about when Kamala first announced for president, right? When she first took over after Biden withdrew.
yeah,
I thought that she really got that. Her
yeah,
campaign was, I thought, so on point with talking about how her candidacy, how her leadership,
yeah,
how her place in the White House was going to make people feel. Right? She
yeah,
talked about her and Tim Walz talked about the America that they saw. Right? It was
yeah,
very much based in that. Now the problem I think was that because of the compressed time period, they
yeah.
didn't have the time to support that with policy prescriptions that people understood. So I think they maybe erred too much in the emotion of it and not enough in the policy side, because there's a sweet spot between those two items.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's one of the biggest problems. People always look at her race where she had 107 days and she didn't have enough time to really get out her entire platform or her vision for America. But like you said, at the initial part of it, you really saw some of that versus what we had saw with the Biden reelection campaign, which was basically we're going to run on all the same things. Trump is bad. We're good. Economy,
Mhm.
jobs, healthcare, vote for us because it worked the first time and it wasn't working the second time. Kind of it's always a sore spot for all of us now as we look back at that. We wish things could have been differently. Obviously, I do, you do, everybody does. And so, but we can't do anything about that now. But the good thing is we can do something about it, you know, for future elections and getting people educated on a lot of these things like you're talking about. So, yes. All righty. So, what are Democrats across the country doing wrong with voter education, in your opinion?
I think they're not being specific enough with people.
Okay,
In other words, like I don't think they're really understanding what people know and what they don't know, right? And so
gotcha.
I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is that there is a preaching to the choir that goes on within the Democratic Party. It probably happens within the Republican Party as well,
Yeah,
although I'd argue maybe not. Maybe that's why they've done such a great job. But there's this preaching to the choir, meaning that when candidates are out and they are doing canvassing, for an example, they're not talking to the middle, right? They're
yeah,
talking to people based upon how likely they are to be voters. They're concentrating in precincts and in counties and in states where they think they've got the best opportunity. So, for example, I think the DNC did Arkansas dirty during the 2024 election because
mhm,
they basically said, "Oh, Arkansas, it's a red state. Nothing's going to happen there. Well, we're not going to get enough. There's not enough electoral votes.
yeah,
There's not enough money, so we're just going to completely and totally ignore it."
yeah,
And I was arguing during that time period that if the DNC had spent a little bit of initiative in Arkansas, Arkansas had enough momentum of its own going into this, like turning into more blue, talking about being more liberal. I didn't
yeah,
know you were right, that it could have been a bellwether for change. And so
yeah,
I think that the DNC was short-sighted in the way that they approached 2024. I think they're letting the numbers be too too significant, and they're forgetting
Yeah.
about people. They're starting to look at people as being the means to their end and
Yeah.
not the reason that all this is happening in the first place.
That's so interesting. And it makes me think of 2016 on Hillary's campaign, where there was a big fight about getting out there and engaging more people directly versus looking at a lot of the data. And Robbie Mook said this is what all the numbers are saying and everything. And then it turned out to be not true. And so I think you could definitely look at that across the country and see that, where we're basically targeting a lot of voters, but then we're leaving a lot of the ones out that we should be talking to, and just ignoring these places that are deep red and everything really doesn't fix the problem at all. And like, you can't ignore certain states, because then if you ignore them too long and then they get so far behind, we know it's so much harder to catch up.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially in a state like Arkansas that didn't really have any money. Yes.
Exactly.
So yeah.
The DNC not only ignored us, but they actually pulled resources out of the state. Right.
Yeah.
We were trying to be involved with local candidates, statewide candidates, et cetera, during the 24 cycle. And you know this, the pleas were coming in. Oh, instead of worrying about Arkansas, why don't you write postcards to Pennsylvania? Like, really, why take our volunteers? We still had local races to win, right? We still had people that needed to be supported here, and money was stripped out, resources were stripped out, and I think it was short-sighted.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to win seats on the state legislature, because that's one of the only ways that we can stop Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the Republicans in Arkansas from doing what they want to do. And if we don't have money to do that, we're never going to be able to basically, win back the minority, win back the majority in the state. And so I think they have like an 7-seat lead right now, which is going to take multiple cycles, but every race is essentially going to take money. And so if we don't have resources or anything, then yeah, you're looking at some really tough races. So, okay. Is just showing up with literature and talking points sufficient to convey the Democratic Party's platform and policy accomplishments?
I would say it depends on what it depends upon how you came up with those policy platforms.
Yeah.
Right? Did you come up with those because you were out listening to people?
Yeah.
Did you come up with them because you actually were spending time in communities, in VFWs and union halls and local communities, talking to people, and so you developed your policy platform around what people want? Then if you did that, then I think you could just go out with literature drops, right, and talking points, and you could make a difference. But that's not what happens, right?
Yeah.
The Democrats, as you mentioned this earlier, I think have been very much on the defense, and they've been allowing the Republicans to frame the agenda. So they're constantly defending against, right? And when that's their approach, to say that, well, we don't have a new or fresh idea, but we're not going to do that, then people are bored. And I don't think it creates any excitement, and it doesn't create any reason for them to overcome inertia, right? And we all know it takes more energy to get that body moving than to keep it in motion. And we have to spend more time thinking about what it is we're trying to put forward, I think.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's one of our biggest problems is, like you said, community investment. And if you've been around doing a lot of the work and everything, then a lot of these people already know you, but they're already familiar with a lot of your campaign platform strategy, your accomplishments, if you're an incumbent, or the Democratic Party's accomplishments. But if we show up out of nowhere and we just have this stuff and nobody knows us, then there's going to be, to me, a lack of trust to begin with. But also, like you said, you have to excite people and you have to inspire them, especially on our side, because we know the right's going to get out regardless. They're going to get out and vote every single time. And if we don't get out and vote, then they usually beat us, right? When voter turnout is,
And I think, building on that, Max, I think we have to be speaking to the middle. We can't be speaking to the base all the time. I think Republicans are beginning to learn that lesson. I think the Democrats need to learn that lesson. You need to be speaking to the folks who could go either way. The ones who, my work is in identity, right? And like one of the complaints I always have about political science is that we tend to conflate identity with demographics, right? So we do
Yeah.
this polling and we say, well, white men between the ages of 35 and 45 are going to vote this way, right?
Yeah.
And what we forget about is that identity is different, right?
Yeah.
Identity is how you look at yourself in relationship to a problem. And the
Okay.
identity that we invoke can be completely different. So for an example, for me, right? If I was to do an exit poll, someone might count me as a, upper middle-aged white woman from the South, right? That would
Yeah.
be my characteristics. And so they think
Yes.
I'm going to vote like everyone else in that demographic. But I
Yes.
might walk into the voting booth and vote as a mom of four kids,
Yeah.
as someone who lived in Florida most of my life, as someone who, there's lots of different ways that I could vote. And so
Yes.
we have to start broadening how we look at people, right?
Yeah.
And quit thinking about them as just purely, the base.
Yeah, and basically putting people in those demographics and those certain groups and everything, like you said, because they could fit multiple groups.
Yeah.
Me and you could both fit multiple groups, right? And
Yeah.
if we're strictly just going to say, okay, we're going to try to go through all of these Democrats or these likely Democrats or these people who voted for Democrats in the past, I think we're going to miss out on a lot of them. And then you realize too that a lot of people who don't think they're fans of the Democratic Party or they don't see themselves as a Democrat, but they actually they agree with our side a lot. It's just that first step of getting them and speaking to them. And if they never speak to us, you never really get to that next step. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
I think you're dead on. I think you're absolutely right, Max. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned out there is that you can talk about 2 or 3 issues. We're always going to disagree, right? We're always probably going to disagree with a lot of people: abortion, guns, maybe healthcare, maybe not healthcare, education. But there's going to be so many other issues that aren't so hot topics that you can say, okay, well, gosh, the Democrats are actually doing this, right? College, like student loans. Mm-hmm. Okay, who doesn't like student loans and who doesn't think that's a good idea, right? And what the Biden-Harris administration did is they forgave a lot of student loans with people who were in the poorest tax bracket, right? Or that needed the help the most. So a lot of those people are going to be Republicans or they're going to be in the middle, right? But they may not have even known that, right? So voter education, civic engagement, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the first steps to improving voter education?
I think building community is a big part of it, right?
Gotcha.
So that we have an opportunity to practice. There's so many layers of things that need to be changed. Education certainly is part of it. The fact that like here in Arkansas, we teach a semester of civics in the 9th grade.
Yeah.
Like, what? No, we should, there should be so much more to it than that, right? If anything, we should at least move it to be a junior or senior so kids are getting ready to vote so that they think they might care about civics, right?
Yes.
So there's educational issues, there's community building issues, there's inclusion issues. I think we just have to keep working on it a little bit at a time.
Yeah. And we can definitely get into some more of that in future episodes.
Yeah.
And we can, for sure. So, okay. Thank you. So what are the top things the Democratic Party needs to do to enhance voter education in future elections? Like what's just something that comes off the top of your head, or like what's an important thing?
They need to start listening better. I don't think they're listening well. And so I think they're trying to convince the public that what they want to do is what's best instead of listening to what people want. I think that every time there is a break in Congress, like just talking about it on a federal level, every time there's a congressional break, there should be town hall meetings in every congressional district.
Yeah.
And Congress should be not spending all of its time. I don't know what they're doing, but they should be spending their time listening, right? And really listening, because here's the other problem. If I see one more event billed as a town hall where the candidate or the person in power is the only one who does the talking, I'm gonna just start screaming right? It's so frustrating to me. A town hall should be about people speaking. And those in power listening. So I think we need to do more. I think we need to do more of that.
Yeah. So instead of town halls and forums and where you get all the people in a room and everything and they're listening to the candidate, listen to the people. The candidate should be saying, what are your top 3 to 5 issues, right? Let's go around the room. Let's have a discussion about this. We want to know, why aren't you voting? Yeah.
And be accessible, be accessible. I remember when I was here doing research, right? So this is before I moved here. I was over at Community Bakery.
Okay.
And I was like working on my laptop and I was just like, having a cup of coffee, working on my laptop. And all of a sudden I looked up, there's this man standing in front of me. And he said, I don't think we've met, but I see you in here. And I said, hi. And he put his hand out and he said, hi, I'm Asa.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm like, the governor of Arkansas, right? And we started chatting. Like he wanted to know what I was doing. What was I finding? What did I think? Right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of people we need to have in office, right? People who are out in their communities, asking folks what it is that they need. I mean, that's why we're having this big disconnect right now about, like President Trump in his State of the Union address last night is talking about how things are so much better.
Yeah.
Well, obviously he's not talking to everyday folks, right?
Yeah.
Because everyday folks are not feeling things are better. Their insurance rates are up, their gas rates are up, their cost of food is up, their job prospects are down. So it's like there's that disconnect. I think we have to work on that.
Yeah. Listen to the people and get a sense of how they're feeling and what kind of pain they're feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And what issues are affecting them directly, then how can we address those? And what are some of the solutions we're working on to address those, right? Instead of just coming and telling you, well, we're doing this, and this. Okay, well, those people may not care about those specific things, but what are specifically you going to do to help me with this, right? You have problems with health insurance. You have problems with your kid being able to go to a good school, right? You have problems with a lack of transportation in the city. So all of these things, if nobody is talking to you directly about that, then you're going to think, okay, these people don't care about me, right? Then
I think you're right, Max. And I think it's also like building upon best practices. Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff happening in our communities, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if we were to have a government that was paying more attention to that and then trying to replicate or support or enhance those things that are working, I think we'd be way ahead of that. I think about it like in Florida. So in the early 90s, when I was in Florida, I worked for a health insurance company. I was a regional manager. And so we put together this program. It's during the Clinton administration, healthcare was a big topic.
Yeah.
How do we reform it? That sort of thing. So we sat down and Governor Childs, Lawton Childs was the governor at that time. So his office and I was representing the insurance industry, and we had some insurance agents and some healthcare providers, doctors, hospitals, this like group of people. We got together and we kind of brainstormed on like, what could we possibly do together in a very collaborative way to make a difference? So we came up with this product that was designed for the uninsured population. And we introduced it. And within a matter of like months, we had thousands of people who had been without insurance for at least 6 months back in the insurance rolls, right? And then from that, the government was able to use that as a model, as one way of doing things that they could then incorporate and pass laws on to expand it, right? And that was like when the healthcare initiatives began, which ultimately turned into ACHA, right? So it's like this idea of look at what's working locally, support it as a member of government, as somebody in power, and then figure out how you can help duplicate it. I think the answers are in our communities, but our elected politicians aren't listening to those communities or looking for those solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's something too that we're going to really have to put an emphasis on as we move forward with these future elections. Especially across the country, because we're going to have to get out there and listen to the people. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're here today is like, how can we do that better? But also, how can we work on this voter engagement, voter education, civic engagement, and all of these things better? So thank you. Okay. So last question, if you could speak to DNC Chair Ken Martin, what would you tell him?
Reprioritize the states.
Okay.
Get away from putting all of this focus on what's happening on a federal level. I mean, I think the national picture, of course, is important, and I'm not saying
Yeah.
we want to give up on controlling the House or the Senate or the executive offices. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that, but I'm saying that you have to give support to the states and realize that just like in this country, it's not just the elite who are important, but it's everyday folks who are out there just trying to live their lives. The same thing is true in the states. It's not just Pennsylvania and New York or Georgia or California that matter,
Yeah.
right? Arkansas and Oklahoma and Nevada and, I don't know, Rhode Island, right? They
Yeah.
count. They count. And so I'd like to see him reprioritize the states and building strong states and strong communities.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's a good point. That's not one I really hear a lot when you're getting that advice from people about what they want to see. So yeah, it does make sense though, because if you just ignore all these states and everything, you can't just strengthen the blue ones and the blue wall and everything, then just ignore all the other ones, especially in a time when there's national elections and you're going to say, okay, Arkansas, can you help us win these elections? And people here are going to be like, okay, but you didn't do anything for us, right?
Right. And I think it's a situation where, if we're strong locally, right, and we're strong in our states, it'll roll up because the mindset doesn't change, right?
Yeah.
If we're based in community, if we're based in strong unions, we're based in strong mutual support agencies, all of those kinds of things, that's gonna carry forward. So don't distract, right, from what's happening at the local level. Support it instead. I think it would make a huge difference.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And I think Tocqueville would agree with me. So
yeah. Okay. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I just really appreciate the chance to have this conversation. You and I talked about a number of these topics before, but I love this being able to do it in kind of a free-flowing way. And so I just really appreciate you giving me the chance to get on my little soapbox a little bit. So thank you and share what I've learned. So
I appreciate you too. And this podcast is so much better that you're a part of it and that you're a part of Change for the People. And this is just stuff me and you talk about all the time anyway. We're just putting it on live stream now on a podcast, because when I saw you a few weeks ago, we basically had a lot of the same conversations, right?
Yeah.
Sure. So now people get to listen to it. So, okay. Do you want to tell people about your organization and how they can help?
Yeah, so our organization we're on the internet. That's the best way to find us, of course. Our website is www.arkaction.net. So arkaction.net. You'll find there a list of the events that we're hosting. You'll find a huge list of resources for voting, for direct democracy, for being involved in your communities. And I'm just an email away. So I'd love to help in whatever way we possibly can. We're nonpartisan, nonprofit. So we would just welcome the chance to talk to you about what it is you need and hopefully what we could fill for you.
Absolutely. Terrific. Okay. I'm going to put on a little exit music.
Okay.
Let's see. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Change for the People. We want to change the way we campaign. This is one of the ways we're going to do it. Get out there and do a lot of voter education, but start building these relationships way before the election starts. But we really want to engage, inspire, and empower people across the country to become a part of the change. So join us at events all across America. And we want to really get out there and just make a difference, not only in future elections, but in people's lives and people's communities, and build people power around the country. There's a lot of ways to get involved. You can go to events, you can get on social media, you can knock on doors, you can do phones. But we are excited to have you join us in the future. And thanks for joining us on this episode. And you can find us at changeforthepeople.com. We're on Twitter. We're on TikTok, Blue Sky, Facebook, everything. So look for us, and we will see you next episode.